Hello and welcome to the Student Voice. My name is Dylan Orren-King and I am joined by Wayne Township Public Schools Superintendent Dr. Mark Toback to talk about block scheduling. Dr. Toback, welcome.
Thank you, Dylan. It's great to be here.
All right, well, let's start off with the big topic for next year. So in your own words, what exactly is block scheduling?
Okay. Well, like any schedule, a block schedule is a way of organizing the school day. So there's lots of different ways to do that, but block scheduling is a very popular way of setting up a schedule for high schools. There's many advantages to it, and we'll get into some of those advantages. But if you look at the top performing high schools in New Jersey, the question is not who has a block schedule, it's who doesn't. And we're one of the districts that have a great high school system, right? We have two great high schools, and we don't have a block schedule. So it's also a project that has been in the works for 5 years now. There's been a lot of work that's been done by different committees, teacher groups, different people that have added a lot to this discussion that's gone on for a number of years. There's been visitations, there's all sorts of things that have happened leading up to this year and the final implementation for next year.
And those visitations have gone rather well, if anything, from what it's shown.
Yes. So the different committees that have visited other high schools have reported back, even to this day, there is no high school that they have visited that had any real negative feedback regarding a block schedule. It's been a very positive experience at both of these schools, or at the different schools, and they all comment that they would never want to go back to a traditional schedule once they went to a block schedule. So it was a little bit of a transition at first, takes some getting used to, but once it's in place, most people love it.
Well, let's actually move on to Wayne Hill Senior Dan Choi. Okay. Dan, take it away.
So my question for you was, if there's block scheduling next year and there's no periods now, like what it's called, like, cause like it's extended time, but like would it still be called periods, or is it like called like segments now, or just like class in general?
So that is a good question. How exactly would those periods work?
Okay. So the way to think about it is you still would have 8 periods of classes, right? So, but what happens is on any given day, you have 6 periods of instruction and 2 periods that drop. So it's known as a drop block schedule. That's a different type of block schedule. It's not a traditional block, it's a drop block. So what happens is you go through 6 periods of classes. There are 2 classes that you don't have on, say, it's day A. So the days would be organized as A day, B day, C day, and D day. And then you would have your regular periods that go through the day, except you wouldn't have 8 of them, you would have 6 of them. And then you would have a lunch period in the middle. So that's generally how it would work.
Okay, let's move on to Carolina Sidrachi. Carolina, go ahead.
Dr. Toback, how will the homework work in longer classes?
A lot of that is dependent on the teachers. So the fact is that you would, for many people, they see an advantage in that homework is not always due on every day. Right? So sometimes you do have a break. So if you have projects or you have other things to do for a class, because the class doesn't meet every day, sometimes you have a little bit of a break. In other cases, maybe it's an opportunity to catch up on other things. So that's how homework would work. It would be a little bit different. It's more like being in college. It's like being, if you go to a college or a university, the fact is you also don't have a class every day. So it does require a little more maturity, requires a little bit more planning, time management, things like that. But these are all skills that you're going to need for everyone who attends our high schools. They're going to need those skills as they go to college. So the transition to college may be a lot easier.
Okay, now what about the time frame for specific periods? I know there was on one of the things that you put onto the Wayne Hills website. Yep. It went over the specific how many minutes were getting added to each class with the change. But one of the very significant things was the decrease in science classes specifically. Right.
So since that time, there was an adjustment that was made. So the schedule, the latest form of the schedule, does not involve any decrease in science. So there is no decrease. So that changed. But in general, the classes are 58 minutes, and then there is a 25-minute science lab period that goes during lunch. So with that, there's also that's a big breakthrough for anybody who remembers, right? The idea that if you're in an elective and you're constantly being pulled out of the elective for labs, that sometimes is a problem. Creates issues for people. So I mean, that's one of the great things about this schedule, is that now, because labs all take place during lunch period, then you don't have the distraction you have from all of your elective classes. You don't have to worry about that anymore.
Okay, well, let's actually move on to more about lunches. So we actually have Matt Emmerich who will be leading us in for this first.
Hello, Dr. Toback. My one question about block scheduling is, how will lunches work? Like, will you be assigned to a certain spot, like the commons or something, or the hallways, or a certain classroom, or will it become like first come, first serve? and like that's where you'll sit the whole year? And also how will like if you're buying lunches, how that works? Obviously you can't serve the whole school in just one place, and I heard there's gonna be like stuff set up around the school. So just like how's the whole lunch conception gonna work?
So let's hit that in multiple parts. So let's start out with how will lunches exactly work?
Okay. So under a block schedule, there's a unit lunch. Okay. The unit lunch means everybody has lunch at the same time, which sounds like, oh my gosh, that would be a complete free-for-all, but that's not the case. So the idea is that lunch will still be held in the cafeterias that you have, right? The serving locations that you have now. Additional serving locations would be added. So you would have, not only do you have what you have now, you probably have 4 additional service locations, plus you would have grab-and-go stations for people who are just interested in sandwiches and things like that, something they would like to grab quickly. So all said and done, it might actually, you might wind up in a situation where you actually get your lunch a lot faster than what you do now. So it may work out. I believe that'll probably be the case. Most people will probably feel that way. And the other part is the back gym will also be used as an additional location. And the administration, I know, is looking at other locations that might be used in the building, but overall, it'll be spread out nicely. So even though all the students will be having lunch, it will be very orderly. The other part about it, and the thing that people don't consider, is that seniors will continue to leave the building. Right? So you still have hundreds of students that will be leaving the building for lunch period. We've worked with the Wayne Police Department, so I know the one concern is getting all the cars out of our parking lot and onto the street and to wherever the students are going to go for lunch. So the idea behind that is the light would be adjusted, the traffic light would be adjusted, so it would be a lot longer, it stays green a lot longer, so that a lot of students will be able to get out of the parking lot, because we know there'll be a rush. The other part about it, so if you're thinking, well, all these students have to be served lunch, it'll be broken up by science classes. So everybody has a science class, everybody has a lab, and so the reality is that many students will either be pulled or will remain in their labs for the first half, or they'll go to their labs for the second half of lunch. So that is another big change, but it'll work out well because it won't place all the burden for food service all at one time. It'll be spread out throughout the duration of the lunch period.
Okay, well, we're going to continue our discussion with Dr. Toback after a quick break. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the Student Voice. My name is Dylan Orren-King, and we are joined by Dr. Mark Toback, the superintendent for Wayne Hills and all the other schools in our district. So we were talking about lunch, and I actually wanted to hit mainly on those senior portions. You mentioned that we would have police for students going out to lunch, but what about coming in? There's only really one small strip that you're able to come into the parking lot as a senior. So with the amount of seniors that are going to be coming into that one tiny area, how is that going to be handled?
Same thing with the help of the police department and with planning. So like I said, the pressure, the number of students leaving and coming back all at the same time will not be, it won't happen all at once because of the labs. It'll be spread out. So I think that should work out fine. And if things don't work out kind of exactly as planned, we can make adjustments and figure it out. But there are many schools in New Jersey that have these unit lunches, and they also have seniors who leave for lunch, and it works out. You know, it'll be fun.
Okay, well, we're actually going to toss it over to Nicole Bergman for her question.
Will there be club meetings during lunch?
So that's one of the huge advantages of the block schedule, right? The whole idea that I know that there are so many students at Wayne Hills that are so heavily involved in the school, that they're involved in athletics, they're involved in clubs, activities, things after school. So it's very hard to do all those things. And there's a lot of students that I'm sure would rather get more involved in the clubs and things like that, but they aren't able to because ultimately they're involved in other things after school. So the idea of having the unit lunch is that there are a lot of different ways that students can get involved in clubs. If there are club meetings that are scheduled, that's up to the club advisors, but I'm guessing that that'll be a big attraction for them as well because their clubs are better. They maximize their clubs. So I think that'll work out very well as far as clubs and activities. The lunch period will also be a great time to catch up on homework if you miss class. You, in many cases, will be able to meet with your teacher to make up work and things like that.
Okay, well, let's also talk about that more specifically. I mean, you could have students that would be able to go to their teachers, work, be able to do more work, and possibly able to learn more things over time.
Yes.
So how could you put an advantage on that mainly when, you know, seniors are going to be leaving for an increased amount of time, and then they have to come back all at once, and then you have students all over the school seemingly.
So not all over the school. They would be basically on passes, and so there would be order, and it would not be that students can just go anywhere they want. They would have to, like we have now, there would be monitoring of the hallways, there would be monitoring of the cafeterias and the service areas, and there's also the possibility that we would lock down certain parts of the school where students would not be allowed if there's no activities there. So that's something that would, that's something that we would start very cautious, and we would maybe scale things back a little bit as time goes by, and we get a better sense of what this is going to look like.
Okay, well, let's move on to sort of back to periods. Now, what I really want to talk about is the negatives and the benefits that this will have to students. Now, of course, there is going to be an increased amount of time for each individual period. Right. Do you think that'll affect student fatigue over time in each period, possibly affecting more focus-wise?
Okay. So what I have to say about that is that block scheduling, any schedule, is what you make of it. Okay. So I know that one of the things that teachers regularly report in the current schedule is a lot of times, particularly with electives and maybe a lot of other classes, there's just not enough time to get all the things that you need to have done. So it depends what kind of fatigue you're talking about. If you're talking about a kind of fatigue that exists when you don't have enough time to do something and you're always in hurry-up mode, where you're just boom, 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 things are going very quickly and you don't have time to even think, that's one type of fatigue. That's fatigue you have now because these classes do go very quickly, right? The other kind of fatigue would be that the classes are a little bit longer. There is more content that maybe is delivered during the course of a day, but there's also changes in teaching that typically happen when you're talking about a block schedule, right? So the teaching style changes somewhat. So there are some things that teachers do differently. There's activities, there's other things that go along with each lesson that you don't have time to do now, but under a block schedule, you would. So now you have time as a teacher to deliver content, right? I know when I was a teacher, I worked in a high school that had 45-minute periods. There's the time to deliver the content, but if you wanted to run like a quick experiment or a lab or something to really show students how something works, I was a math teacher, that was hard to do because there just wasn't enough time. And so you had basically a really, really tight schedule you had to meet. So I think it may actually be more relaxing as a student.
Okay, well, we're going to toss it over to Brandon Caprioni. Let's see what he has to say.
So, Dr. Toback, what benefits will block scheduling have on the students?
Okay. Well, you basically answered that. But
a little bit. We did talk about some of the big things, right? That classes might be a little bit more relaxed, right? That you'll have additional opportunities for learning. We talked about clubs. We talked about labbing out, all those things. So, yeah, there's a lot of advantages. And plus, I do think that ultimately we have many excellent teachers here. And I think that they will ultimately adjust and adapt to something that will allow the students to benefit from the fact that they have more time with you, right? They will maximize this time that you have to make it more beneficial. So, and like I said, a lot of very excellent high schools have a block schedule. I'm sure it'll work out very nicely here. And as time goes by, you'll probably notice additional benefits beyond the ones that I described. There's probably a lot of other ways that block scheduling will benefit the students who attend Wayne Hills High School.
Could it also help with certain electives flexibility in what they do with this class? Sure. For example, the TV class, would it reserve them more time to truly get into work and then be able to take that work and then apply it to going out of school and then moving on to college?
Well, that's the great thing about, honestly, the unit lunch is ultimately the unit lunch for all students it's available. The full lunch period is available when you're not assigned to a lab, right? Which is most of the time. But the fact is that's also what you make of it. Many of our students are very motivated here, and so they have teachers they want to visit. There's things that they want to do. There's questions they might have, and so a unit lunch is something that I think a lot of students are really going to like, because ultimately it gives you the opportunity to have a working lunch, right? A working lunch is something that probably a lot of students would like, knowing you have this massive workload. We know that students are stressed, that it's difficult. Being a high school student is not an easy thing, and so this might take a little bit of the edge off.
Okay, well, one thing I'd also like to add, because there was also this little addition in the slideshow that caught my eye.
Okay.
Is there a potential that starting and end times for the day will be changing?
That was something that was discussed, and what we did is we solicited the opinions from the community. So we solicited the opinions of parents at the elementary, the middle school, high school level. We solicited the opinions of students. So there was a thought exchange that went out, so students had the opportunity to respond. and we also solicited the opinions of teachers, okay? And so in the end, the response to a change in schedule and what we were talking about was overwhelmingly negative. There was not support at all to make that change. So, but we did consider the plight of high school students in looking at that change, right? The bottom line is that Wayne Hills and Wayne Valley, both, the school day starts very early compared to the rest of the schools in this area. It's a very early start time. So we made an effort to look at that as an option, but there was not much support for it.
Well, do you think that came mainly from elementary, or would that come mostly from high school?
Well, in some cases it came even from the high school, yeah, because there's a lot of people that were concerned about sports and athletics and the ability to, for practice times, and also the time needed to get from Wayne Hills High School to an away event and be ready, to compete. So the bottom line is most high school athletic programs are scheduled for 4 o'clock starts for games, right? And so just about every sport is dependent on a 4 o'clock start time. So people were concerned that ultimately there would not be enough time to get students dressed, ready to go on a bus, and to where they need to be with adequate warm-up time. So that was some negative feedback we received from even at the high school level.
Okay, well, let's move on to general student information.
Okay.
This is something I sort of wanted to hit on.
Mm-hmm.
An informational poll of 128 students on the Patriot Press website, 50% said that they were not happy with the change.
Okay.
34% said that they would favor it, and then 16% said that either they would know or they would need more information. What sort of response can you gather from this? That with a majority of students in this poll showing that they at least might not think it's the greatest idea.
Well, I'm guessing that based on some of the discussions I've had with students, I don't know that they're fully aware of all the advantages. So I think if they were aware of all the advantages, and I'm not sure what efforts they made to educate themselves about block scheduling, but there are many students that really in other high schools around the state that love block schedules, and I would that's something we will ask once we start block scheduling, and I'm sure that will be a very different result. Once maybe after a marking period or so of block scheduling, we could do another poll. But as far as students that were interviewed in some of the other high schools we visited, they did say that yes, there was a transition, but the bottom line is that they love block scheduling. So, and like I said, I'm sure that there'll be bumps in the road. There'll be different things that people say, well, maybe under the old schedule that was a little better, or this was a little better. But in the end, I think overall the overwhelming feedback once we get through a marking period of this will be positive.
Okay, another thing I want to hit on. In that same informational slideshow that you provided on the Wayne Hills website, or on the Wayne Schools website, I should say, it mainly states that the information gathered from students is mainly grabbed from NHS, the student government, and I believe it's the peer groups that help younger students at our school. If you run through the numbers, it would show that only 7% of the students then were selected to be polled, which leaves 93% that were not.
Formally polled, there was also, each high school is different. So I know I did talk to Mr. Ruick about this, and he did say that he did also have different focus groups. So he did gather different student groups, specifically to talk about block scheduling and student opinions about it. So that's, according to Mr. Ruick, that's how he involved students here at Wayne Hills. So it wasn't that necessarily everyone was polled, because that's also a hard thing to do if you're not fully aware of what change is going to take place. But once it's explained to people and they hear about it, like I said, Mr. Ruick did have these different focus groups that he worked with to gather student feedback about what would work, what might not work, what students liked, the whole idea behind it. So that's his feedback on it. So there's another angle or another part to this that maybe there's more of the story about that, about student involvement.
Okay, well. That's all I have for my questions. Is there anything else you would like to add about block scheduling, or anything else that the students of Hills should know?
No, I just, nothing really too big, other than I'm sure, like I said, once you give it a chance, once the school adjusts, and once everybody becomes accustomed to this new routine, I'm sure that there's so many benefits. People will certainly, they'll recognize those benefits, and they'll appreciate that the change was made. It's something that people in this school district, I've been here, I'm going into my 6th year, but prior to that, from what I understand, people have been talking about doing a block schedule for somewhere in the range of 10 to 15 years. because other schools were doing it. Other schools were making changes. They were going to a block schedule, and it never, for whatever reason, never worked out. This time it is. So it's a very exciting thing for the district. And like I said, I'm sure that in the end, everyone will really be happy with the switch.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank Dr. Toback for joining us today on The Student Voice. My name is Dylan Orren-King, and we will see you next time.